Daled on the base. And I'm just going to look at the last few lines of the Gemara we left off last week, specifically the very last line. And then I want to look at the Rashi there because it's going to be important to keep that Rashi fresh as we go forward to the next Gemara. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at the line there, the Rashi, then we'll look at the next piece of Gemara with Rashi. And then we're going to go to the different Mefarshim I sent you there, which are essentially going to, in some sense, wrap up a lot of the things we discussed and give the various different halachic angles and how to look at these this question of the wall and the chazis between the various different types of properties. The gina, the bika, the chatzer, etc. So the line we're looking at specifically is Amar, is Abaye Amar. So it's the last line just before the two dots. So before that, Rav Nachman said that a person should make a chazis if he's making a separation with Hutza with Dafna, then he should make a chazis. We discussed at length last week what the chazis might look like. And Rav Nachman also said that he should cover that chazis, whatever it is, with cement, because if the neighbor tried to peel it off, it would be noticeable that it was peeled off. And Abaye says, Abaye Omar, Hutza lesle takanta. Hutza has no other option. Ela b'shtara, nothing other than a shtar will work. So let's see Rashi. Ela b'shtara. Imu asa echad. If one, what's the mean shtar? What kind of shtar does this person have to prove the wall is his? Or it belongs to both, either. So says Rashi, Imu asa echad. If one person did it, Yavayedim, he should bring Edim, the Yachtemuloi, and they should sign for him. That is to say, they are testifying that what they saw, it's like a ksuba, right? In the ksuba, the witnesses are speaking in the ksuba, and they sign saying, we saw that so-and-so took upon himself the obligations of such and such. So likewise over here, they have an Edim that come and sign and say, we observed that so-and-so spent the money to build such and such a wall. Okay. Rashi in theory could have ended here, and everything would be fine. That's what the shtar is, right? That's what we're talking about till now. Till now, Rav Nachman's been talking about how does a person protect himself if he's the only one who built the Hutza, the Dafna. How does he protect himself to make sure the other person doesn't take 50%? So if all Abaye is doing is addressing that question, then Rashi could have stopped right here and finished. And that's his proof that it belongs to him. That's seemingly been discussion. But Rashi continues and says, now, if both of them did it, then then again the same thing. They should do the same thing. They should do the same thing. They should have Edim to testify and observe the fact that the two of them split the cost and did it together. The Yachtim will no sign. Okay, so Rashi adds this din that you can't get away with not having a chazis at all, because the Mishnah says you have to have a chazis for each one. Right? When it comes to a bika, the Gemara is going to discuss in the next shtickle why that is. But when it comes to a bika, the Gemara said that if you build a wall between two properties, you have to have a chazis for each one. With Hutza v'Dafna, so Rav Nachman also said what kind of chazis to make. Even though Rav Nachman was only talking about a chazis that the person is doing on his side to prove that it's his, but L'Poyel, the Mishnah says that when it comes to a bika, if they both did it, then they should make a chazis lazeh v'lazeh, right? That's what the Mishnah said. So even though Rav Nachman is only talking about a chazis on one side, because he's talking about one person who wants to prove that it's his, but l'chura, the same din applies to both, because the Mishnah concluded by saying that you have to have a chazis for both people if they did it together. Even though the Mishnah is talking a wall, and now the Gemara is adding what you would do in the hypothetical of a Hutz v'dafna. And therefore, L'chorah, Rashi goes on to say that the first Abaye would say the same thing. The same way Rav Nachman is only talking about one chazis. But the same din L'chorah should apply if you have to make two chazis because both of them played it. Then if Abaye's solution is Eidim, and that's going to prove that it belongs to you, then the same way you have to have a chazis for both. If it belongs to both, you have to have Eidim to prove that it's both of yours. Okay. Now, why Eidim B'chlal? Why isn't he okay with? This is how I'm understanding Rashi. I could be wrong, but this is l'chorah, right? And then when we look at the other Mefarshim at the end and we see how they paskin, we're going to go revisit this Rashi and see where he fits into their discussion. Now, why is Abaye not okay with Rav Nachman's suggestion to build a chazis and then to cover the chazis with cement so the other person can't ruin it? Because if the person peels off the cement, it is it's noticeable, and we'll be able to tell that the person peeled off the cement. Says Rashi, the svirle, because Abaye is of the view. Kufla de tina, mi'ulu ahutza, someone who peels mortar off of a hutza, kufla peels tina mortar mi'ulu from a pond, hutza, layade, no one will notice. So Rav Nachman's of the opinion, according to Rashi, or Rav Nachman states clearly in the Gemara that if someone peels off cement from a hutza v'dafna, it's noticeable. And Rashi is touching into Abaye that it is not noticeable. So now my question to you is, if I asked you now, in Rashi's opinion, is Abaye saying you must have a shtar? What if 20 years later my neighbor didn't peel the cement? Is that cement that belongs to me? Because I made a chazis, like Rav Nachman suggested, and I put cement, and my neighbor is not a thief, so he didn't peel it off. And now we're in Bezdin, we have no shtar, but I have a chazis with cement on it. Is that a proof that it belongs to me? What would Abaye say in that scenario? So based on what we just said in Rashi, the Pashtos, the answer would be, it's okay. Because the only reason why Abaye says to have two starters, says Rashi, is because in Abaye's view, when you peel cement, it's noticeable. So in order to prevent the hypothetical of my neighbor being a thief and stealing and peeling up the cement, have a shtar. So the shtar in Rashi's view would seem, and we're going to see that this is not the case for other views, but it would seem that according to Rashi, that Rashi is teaching Abaye, that Abaye is only giving us an Eitzah Tova. Not that you have to have a shtar. He's telling you, because the chazis is not what's it called? The chazis is not permanent. The neighbor can undo the chazis by peeling off the cement. So to protect yourself, have a shtar. But do I have to have a shtar? And what if my neighbor's not I trust my neighbor, and he's not a liar, and he's not going to peel the cement, and 20 years later it falls, and I have a chazis to prove it, no one ruined my chazis, no one peeled it. L'chorah, that would be a good enough proof, according to Rashi. So let's just put a pin in that, and remember this little diuk. And we're again, as I said, when we finish the Gemara, we go tell the Mefarshim, we're going to revisit this Rashi to see if we're still correct in our analysis. Okay, weiter in the Gemara. The Mishnah said, that if they built the wall between the two because, and they both agreed, right? Because when it comes to a bika, we said before already that if there's a minhag to build one, okay, you have to build one because of the minhag. But if there's no minhag, you don't have to build one. And therefore, the Mishnah went on to say that if you want to build your own, put it on your side and build a chazis to prove that it's yours. And if you, if the two of them want to do it together, then build a chazis on both sides. That's what the Mishnah said. Then they says Yasu chazis mikan and mikan. Right? V'oisin chazis mikan and mikan. Make a chazis on both sides, and then when it falls later, you'll know to split it halfway because you have a chazis on both sides. So says the Gemara, the obvious question. The Ravashi, Rava of Prazika said to Ravashi, Lo Yasi Lo Lazeh, the Lo Lazeh. Why make a chazis on both sides? Don't put any chazis. And if you have no chazis, it obviously belongs to both. Like Rashi says, Lo Yasu chazis Lo Lazeh, Lo Lazeh. Don't make a chazis not for this one, not for that one. Ba'dei simin. And here is your simin, shelo yasa echad, that it doesn't belong to one person. B'shaloi, that one person didn't make it himself. Shilu asa, because if he was the only one to make it, he would make the chazis on the outside of face, proving that it's his. Which is l'chorda, exactly what happens by a chatzir. By a chatzir, there's no chazis. In taka, you have the lefichach. In taka, you have the lefichach, which says because there's a din that makes you build it, and therefore years later when it falls, it belongs to both of you. But the Gemara did ask pshita, meaning to say, however you touch the word pshita, which we learned in the Gemara, different ways of learning it, but taking Rashi's way of learning it, pshita, that if the wall is between the two of you, it's a chazaka that belongs to both of you. So that pshita l'chorda implies same thing over here. Don't put any chazas on either side, and when it falls, that itself is the proof that it belongs to both of you. Why do you have to have two chazas? So says the Gemara, Amar Le. So Rashi responded to Rava of Prazika, if I'm pronouncing that name correctly, I don't know. But Rashi responded to this Rava, Loi, it's not so, that's not the case. Tzricha, you have to have the chazas on either side. Why? The kadam chad minayu va'avididei. Because one of the two is going to go ahead and make his own chazas. And if the other guy doesn't make a chazis, Omar is going to say, Didehu. It belongs to me because there's only one chazis. Like Rashi says, Va'avididei, oisa chazis b'chutz. Makes a chazis on the outside. What's Rashi adding in these three words you didn't know from the Gemara? What else could the Gemara be saying when the Gemara says Avididei? Oisa chazis b'chutz? Maybe Rashi's coming to address a question which we'll see in the Mefarshim later, but these three words seem to be superfluous. What else is he making? Making a chazis, obviously. That's what we're talking about. Avididei means make a chazis. Oisa chazis b'chutz. And not what? Maybe we'll see later what Rashi's addressing. Okay. Now, the kasha, okay, let's go back to it. We'll address this question later. Now the Gemara asks, the Tana takantel ramai kamash malon. Is the Mishnah coming along and teaching us how to avoid a thief? The Mishnah comes and teaches us dinim. Is the Mishnah supposed to come and tell us that because we're concerned your neighbor is such a thief that he's going to put up a chazis, so that if in the case it falls years later, he's going to take that wall. So therefore, to prevent your neighbor from being such a ramai, from being such a swindler, put a chazis on both sides. And that's what the Mishnah is coming to do. Takantel ramai like Rashi says, takantel ramai bitmia v'chnei dagas ramoin. Because we're worried about a thief. Ikful tanel misnei hamas nisa. The Mishnah is going to go on to say this whole thing, that what do you have to do? When two people build it together, you have to make sure to put a chazis because just in case one guy's going to steal from you. The Mishnah is not a what's the expression? A life hack or book to teach you how to avoid people are going to steal from you. Okay. So this was Rava's response to Ravashi. Ravashi answered by saying that you have to put a chazas on both sides to prevent one person from making it and claiming it's his. And Rava responds by saying, is the Mishnah coming to tell us how to avoid stealers? Amar Le. So Ravashi responded, you have to say that the Mishnah is concerned with Ramoim. Why? Does the first half of the Mishnah not tell you how to deal with someone who might steal from you? Says Rashi, what's the Reisha we're talking about? The Reisha, the first half of the Mishnah, Tekatani. Not the first half of the Mishnah we're talking about Chatzir, but the first clause in the Inyan of Bika. The Reisha, Ketani v'Oisa Chazin Bachutz, the first half, the first clause, where it tells you by a Bika, if a person builds it on his own, he should build it on his side and then make a Chazis. Lav Takana Mishum Ramayhu. Is that not the reason why he's putting a Chazis to avoid maybe someone else is going to make a one? That the neighbor shouldn't say it belongs to both of us. So in other words, the whole din of Bika there is about preventing Ramai. So what's the problem? The Mishnah is telling us how to deal with a Ramai. When it tells the first guy to build a bika, if he's building on his own, if he's building a wall on his own, and what for? So that the other guy doesn't say it belongs to both of us. So Rashi is basically counter-arguing and saying that the Mishnah must be talking about Ramayim anyway. So Amalei, Rava responds to Rashi, it makes sense in the first part, in the first clause, where the Mishnah tells you that if you want to build a chazit on your own, and oisin chazit bachutz, because over there, Tana Dina, the Mishnah told us a din, because it told us a din, Tana Takanta. It told us a solution or an advice on how to deal with a void, protect yourself against a thief, a ramai. But al seifa, but the second clause, Dina Katani, is there a din mentioned? Katani Takanta, that all of a sudden we have to start saying protecting yourself and solutions for dealing with ramayim. So what's the din we're talking about? Says Rashi. Tana Dina, in the first clause, where it says that a person who wants to build a wall on his own, konis u'tok shaloi, says like this: Hoyo, considering that ubika in minig ligdar, when it comes to a bika, there's no minig to put up a fence, and therefore the din is he cannot compel his neighbor to split the cost with him. Ella konis u'tok shaloi, he has to bring the wall onto his own property and build it. Ubayna and build. So that part's the din. That part is a din, because when it comes to a gina, there's different situations. Even if there's no custom, if there's a custom, you might compel. Even if there's no custom at all, you could also compel. So the Gemara has to tell it, the Mishnah has to tell us a din, that this idea of kaifin and chaveri, to live in a kaisel, they can compel each other, has its limits and doesn't extend to a bika. So there's a din. Now, the tada dinner, and because I already told you the din, that you have to build a property on your side, have to build a wall on your property. Tana takanta, the Mishnah also says a solution. Va'isa chazis, mishum ramai. That you should build a chazis to protect yourself against the thief. Ela seifa, but the second clause, dina loitana, there's no din there. What's the din? That if two people wants to make it, they make it in the middle. Where's the din? If two people, the hapshita, the imas midashneim, tas mishal b'nehem. It's obvious. Two people want to build a wall together. Build it between the two of you. I mean, where's the din? The kulumishim takanto deretanya. The entirety of that clause is only to teach you the chazis. That's the only uniqueness of that whole clause. The first clause, which says that if you want to build a wall, build it on your side of the property, that's a din. The din is you can't compel your neighbor. And once we're telling you a din, we tell you, by the way, to protect yourself, pull the chazis. But the second clause, which says that the two want to make together, they split the cost and they split it between each other, that itself is not a din. That's the obvious thing. Partners want to build something, they build together. And then it goes on to say atakanta, that you want to protect yourself, pull the chazis on both sides. Okay. So we're stuck still with our question. And the question really is, the first question was, this is twofold question. The first question is, why Bechal build two chazis? Don't build any chazis and it belongs to both of them. Now, if the reason we're building this chazis is to protect ourselves against my neighbor who might, if I didn't have a chazis, right, then my neighbor might put a chazis before me and claim it belongs to him. So the reason to build two chazis in the beginning is to protect myself against my neighbor who might be a thief. And therefore the Gemara is questioning, why would the Gemara's questioning why the Mishnah would be concerned with giving me advice on how to deal with a thief. It's not the Mishnah's job. Says the Gemara, Amar Ravina says, Hacha, over here, the second clause, which says that if they both did it together, then they build it in the beginning, they build it in the middle, and oisin chazis mikan and mikan. That's talking about bahutzi. They use hutzi v'daf naskin. And what's the Mishnah coming to teach us? La fuke medabaye, to negate the view of Abaye. The Amar, which Abaye said before, hutza les letakanta, ela b'shtora, that hutza has no solution to protect you other than a shtar. Kamash malan, so it comes to the Mishnah and teaches you the b'chazis sagir, that chazis is good enough. So what does this mean? What is Ravina saying? Ravina is saying that the Mishnah is teaching you that a din. The Mishnah is not teaching you how to protect yourself against your neighbor. The Mishnah is teaching you a din. And the din is that a chazis for two people proves that it belongs to both of you. even by a hutzah. Unlike Abaye, which said that only a star works to prove that it belongs to you. Hutzah has the kanta without a star. So now, thinking of the Gemara at this point. Okay, before we get to that, let's look at the Tosafos. Now the question becomes, what is Abaye thinking? In Abaye's view, what's the point of the last clause? In Ravina's opinion, the last clause is teaching you a din. And the din it's teaching you is that chazis works, and you don't have to rely on shtar. Right? Unlike Abaye, which seems to say that you have to rely on a shtar. You can only rely on a shtar to prove that the hutzah belongs to you. Yeah? So what's Abaye thinking then? What's the point of the clause according to Abaye? Says Tosafos, lafukim with Abaye. Abaye savar, Abaye is of the view, the shapir is the lemisne takante l'ramay, that it is indeed appropriate for the Mishnah to spend its time telling you how to avoid a swindler. And taka, there's no din. Taka, there's no din. Now, in this line of Tosafos avoided a major question, which you're going to see in some of the other mafarshim that they do ask the question. So let's actually look at the other mafarshim. Let's begin with the Rosh, or they should make a bet. I think we should begin with the Rosh first. Let me look at the pictures here. Okay, we can start with the Shittim Mekubatzes. So if you look at the pictures I sent you today, it's the third dot I made. The first two is the Rosh, and the third one is the Shittim Mekubatzes. And the Shittim Mekubatzes is quoting, and you can see the Rabbi Yonah. So he goes back to Abaye, but he's going to quote from our Gemara, and that's why I went back to Abaye, because it's going to be linked. As you can see, the Gemara concluded that according to Ravina, the Mishnah is coming to avoid Abaye, which means two things. We have to understand how Ravina understands Abaye, in that Ravina is saying that the Mishnah is telling us not to paskin like Abaye, and then we have to understand how Abaye deals with the Mishnah, how Abaye answers the question of what's the point of the last clause. Okay. So says Rabbi Yonah in the Shittim Mekubatzes here. He quotes the Gemara, which says Abaye says Hutzah listed the kanta lo shtar. That Hutzah has no solution. You can't put no chazis, like Rav Nachman, which said that you could put a chazis in a Hutzah. Abaye says no, you have to put a shtar. Why? The dilma mekafle l'sharker the tina, because maybe the person is going to peel off the mortar, v'layoda, and he won't know. Like this is the same thing that Rashi said, right? Rashi said that Abaye is of the view that if you peel off mortar from the Hutzah, it's not noticeable, and therefore the only way to protect yourself is with a shtar. Now it says Benida, it seems to me, the avid chazis b'chutzah. Let's say you didn't listen to Abaye, you listened to Rav Nachman, so you didn't write a shtar, and instead you put a chazis in the Hutzah, and the chazis is pointing to your direction or pointing to the other direction, whatever. It's indicating it belongs to you. So what would Abaye say about that case? What Abaye, and it's 20 years later, and the Hutzah and the chazis is still there. It's 20 years later, and the chazis is still there, and now the wall fell, and they come to the bezdin, and one neighbor claims the whole wall belongs to me. V'haraya, I have a chazis. So how does Abaye paskin? You have no shtar, right? So we learned before, we indicated that l'chura from Rashi would seem that you could claim that. And Abaye is telling you to protect yourself. Because a chazis on a hutzah can be easily undone, therefore the best solution is to have a shtar. Which means, if that's the way we're going, like we learned before in Rashi, then Abaye would paskin, it belongs to you. And your chazis is a good raya. But Rabbi Yonah says, loy mahanya lay, v'loy midi. It would not be of any use, l'dai to Abaye, according to Abaye. So if you came into court with a wall and you said it belongs to me, there's a chazis, Abaye, in Rabbi Yonah's view, Abaye would reject it and say it doesn't belong to you. We're sorry. Why? Because the Chachamim said in Abaye's view that Chazis does not work by a Hutza mishum da asi le pseida, because it could easily be lost. The dilma makafale, because you can easily peel it off, and therefore, because that's the din, because the din is that a Chazis by a Hutza is a shvachag Chazis and can easily be done. Therefore, matzi chavre toyin. Therefore, the other guy can claim I didn't care. And I never cared the fact that you made the Hutza, the Chazis. Because Chazis doesn't work for Hutza. So the fact that I can peel it off is not a hypothetical. That if I peel it off, I'm going to ruin your Chazis. Rabbi Yain is saying the very fact that the din acknowledges that I could peel it off means the Chazis itself is of no value. And therefore, if I came to court and I brought a wall with a chazis and I said it belongs all to me, there's a chazis, it's a hutz of a dafna, Abaye would say, I'm sorry, you got to split the cost. You have a chazis. The reason why your neighbor didn't do anything about it is because there's no din to have one, and therefore he ignored it. So it's not a raya that it belongs to you. So he's completely arguing with Rav Nachman, not just giving you a solution that because it can be peeled, protect yourself with a shtar. Abaye in Rabbi Yehuda's view is saying a different din. Hutz, that chazis does not work by hutz of a dafna. And because the Chachamim said it doesn't work, if you have one, it's of no use. In other words, a chazis only works if the Chachamim have decided that this is a viable chazis. But because in Abaye's view, you can easily peel off the cement of the chazis on the hutzah, therefore this is not considered a viable chazis. And because it's not a viable chazis, we reject it. And therefore, less let the kanta elu b'shtar. You want to prove it's yours, you have to have a shtar. And the fact that you come in with the chazis, we're very sorry, you still got to split 50-50. And Rabbi continues, and don't say that Abaye is just telling you good advice. Not to rely on the chazis b'hutza, because maybe the friend is going to peel off latina the mortar, the cement. No one's going to know. Miu the avidle. No one can know who did it. I will call manchim miskayim, but so long as the chaz is still there, mahanyale it works. Don't say that that's what Abaye is saying, which is what we suggested at the beginning in Rashi. Right? Don't say that Abaye is telling you good advice, that because the cement can be peeled off, write a shtar to protect yourself. But if you don't have a shtar, and years later you come in with your chazis and the chazis is still there, we're going to accept it and we'll give you the full wall because you have a chazis. Don't learn that way in Abaye. What's the raya? And the raya is the Gemara we just learned now. Because that would mean Abaye is not arguing with Rav Nachman. He agrees with Rav Nachman that you can make a chazis on a hutzah. He just He's just giving you good advice to protect yourself by having a shtar. That cannot be the case. The im came, because if that were the case, if Abaye agrees that chazis works by hutzah, and he's just giving you good advice to protect yourself, what is the meaning of that which the Gemara says later, which we just learned? Ravina said that when the Mishnah says to build the chazas on both sides, what's the Mishnah coming to teach you, said Ravina? It's coming to negate the opinion of Abaye. If Abaye agrees that a chazas works, how is this negating Abaye's opinion? Abaye is only giving you good advice to protect yourself. And Abaye agrees you can use two chazas. So how could the Mishnah, in Ravina's view, be rejecting Abaye if Abaye doesn't disagree? Is there anyone who would disagree and say that a shtar is not the best thing? So if all Abaye is telling you an eitzah tova, protect yourself and have a shtar, who's going to disagree with that? So what you're telling me, if Abaye is only telling you good advice, and Ravina says the Mishnah is coming to reject Abaye, does that mean the Mishnah is telling you not to have a shtar? I mean, obviously a shtar is the best thing possible. So what kind of rejection of Abaye is that? Muzman Zogin, that Abaye says chazis does not work, and you must have a shtar. And therefore the Mishnah comes and says, Oisin chazis mikan u'mikan, to tell you exactly that you don't have to rely on a shtar. Of course, shtar is better, but you don't have to rely on a shtar. And that's exactly the din the Mishnah is telling you. Right? So this is very nice pshat in the Gemara. But what we're missing here is, How does Abaye explain the last clause? If Abaye, in Rabbi Yona's view, like Shitrik Betza said, Abaye is of the opinion that Chazis does not work by Hutza, and you have to have a shtar. So what's the last clause of the Mishnah saying? That Oisin Chazis Mikan and Mikan. So in Rabbi Yona's view, you'd have to say that the Mishnah is telling you to have a Chazis Mikan and Mikan by a wall, not by a Hutza. Because in Abaye's view, by a Hutza, according to Rabbi Yonah, Chazis doesn't work. So when the Mishnah says at the end, the last clause, Oisin Chazis Mikan and Mikan, it must be talking about a wall. If that's the case, what's the din the Mishnah teaching you? It's not teaching you any din. What's it teaching you? It must be teaching you an Eitz Tova. Avoid a swindler by putting up a chazis on both sides. And that's what Tosafos says. The shaper is following? So let's think. In Tosafos' view, does Tosafos agree with Rabbi Yonah? Well, why not? Tosafos could agree with Rabbi Yonah in the Shittim Kebetzas, and he could say that Abaye Taka agrees that Abaye is of the opinion that Chazis doesn't work by Hutza, and therefore, what's the point of the Mishnah? The last clause to tell you to put a Chazis Mikan and Mikan, that's talking about a wall, and the Mishnah is okay giving you Takana L'Ramai. L'chora. Where we are in Rashi, I'm still not 100% sure. Maybe we'll come back to it when we finish. Now let's have a look at the Rosh. Let's look at the Rosh. So you'll see it's the second and third picture that I put a dot there. Let's look at the Rosh. So he says a similar thing to Rabbi Yoda, but a bit of a different twist. And he's going to have an argument here, and then we're going to have to try to reconcile all this. Okay, so the first part of the Rosh we learned last week, we'll just review quickly. My chazis, what's a chazis? Amar Rav Huna. Rav Huna says, the kayaf le'akarna malavar. Rav Huna, this is already last week's Gemara, that Rav Huna says you bend the top of the wall outward. Rabbi Yochanan says the shaya ba'amsa malavar, that you smear cement on the top amma on the outside. And we learned this last week. Rosh says that Rav Huna and Rabbi Yochanan are arguing that you give them two different options for a chazis, either smeared cement. This is talking about a wall, not a hutza. Either smeared cement or a bent wall. But Rabbi Yochanan of the pligi. Rabbi Yochanan says that there is an argument. Upasak Rabbi Yochanan, and Rabbi Yochanan paskin like Rabbi Yochanan that you have to smear cement rather than bend the wall. And according to Rabbi Yochanan, Bahal pligi. This would be the root of dispute that Rabbi Yochanan saw. Rabbi Yochanan is of the opinion that if a person cuts down a chazis that's bent into his side, no one will notice that it's cut down, and therefore the chazis is ineffective. And Rav Huna Savar, and therefore he says to smear the cement with smear the wall with cement. Whereas Rav Huna Savar kuful layada. Rav Huna is of the opinion that if you peel cement, no one's going to notice, and if the only chazis to make is one of bent. Okay. So the Rosh says no machlokes between Rav Huna and Rabbi Yochanan. We went through this last week, and it's not maybe our Gemara. I'm just kind of reviewing. The Rosh says no machlokes between Rav Huna and Rabbi Yochanan, and there's two options for chazis on a wall. And Rabbi Yochanan is of the opinion that there is machlokes, and he passes like Rabbi Yochanan. Okay, now to our Gemara. Hutza. If you build a okay, let's see. So Hutza, the Mishnah, the Gemara said, Amar Rav Nachman says, the son of Lei, Ditzi Levar, he bends the top outside, whatever shot in the that is, as we discussed last week. Okay, says the Rosh. Kosev Rabbi Yosef HaLevi Zal. Quote from Rabbi Yosef HaLevi. The loy tiknu chachamim chazis. The chachamim only established the idea of a chazis. Ela b'bika, only in a bika. Right? Because the question is, if in the end the Mishnah is giving you an eitzah tova to have a chazis on both sides by a bika, even when you build a wall, right? That's even okay. Well, the Gemara concluded as talking about hutzeh, but still beforehand the Gemara assumed they're talking about a wall. Then, when it comes to a chatzir, or let me put it a different way, if you build it on your own by a bika, so the Mishnah said you have to build a chazis. And what about by a chatzir? If I build it on a wall, do I build a chazis? Right. So when you're splitting it in a chatzir, no chazis. But when you're splitting it in a bika, before the maskana of the Gemara about Hutza, or let's just take the maskana of the Gemara about Hutza, you have to have a chazis on both sides. So why is that? Why by bika, to prove that it belongs to both of you, you have a chazis? And when it comes to chatzir, you don't have to have a chazis to prove that it belongs to both of you. So says Rabbi Yosef, that logic Chachamim chazis el bika. The Chachamim only established the idea of a chazis by bika. Why? Because when it comes to a bika, I can never compel the other person to build a wall with me. And therefore, I have to have proof of whatever happened, either that it belongs to me or that belongs to both of us. Because there's no law, there's no din that will stand for me. In other words, the lefichach isn't there. The lefichach, that because there's a din that says that you have to build it together, therefore, when it falls years later, we know it belongs to both of you, that doesn't exist by bika. And therefore, build a chazis. Aval, but a chatzir, when it comes to a chatzir, like tiknu rabbanon chazis, there's no chazis by a chatzir. Why? Because to begin with, I'm capable of compelling my neighbor to build it. Even in a chatzir which doesn't have din chalukah, as we explained at length in the even in a case where the chatzir doesn't have enough for each person to have 4 amas, and therefore the only way to split the property is if we both agree to split the property. And let's just say, and let's say the 2 partners agreed to split, but one of them says to the other, I'm only okay splitting if you're going to build a wall on your side. So in which case, the other person does need a chazis to prove that it's his. Now, this is the only case where it's a chatzir, and yet we're not necessarily in a din nischayev to both make it. Why? Because it's a chatzir she'en badin chalukah, and therefore you can't split the property unless we both agree. And when I agreed to split the property, I said, look, split the property, no problem, but build a wall on your side. I don't want to lose my 4 amas, or some of my 4 amas. So even then, like tiknu chachamim chazis. Even then, no chazis. The less they takanta, and the guy who built the wall on his side has no choice, but el b'shtar, he has to have a shtar to prove that it belongs to him. Why? So why not? Why not over here make a chazis? Why not over here make a chazis? It's like a good case. There's no din, there's no lefichach, because there's no din that compels us to build a wall. Because I only agreed to to split the property on condition that you're going to build it on your side. So there's no reason, there's no lefichach. So why not have a chazis? Says the Rabbi Yosef, the key in the b'chatzir sheyesh badin chalukah. Because when it comes to a proper chatzir, where there is enough for both of us, and I could compel you to split the property. Lo yehutzruchu letaken. You don't. The chachamim did not say to make a chazis mishum chatzir, and did not say to make a chazis because there's a din, there's a lefichach that's going to prove it belongs to both of you, and therefore mishum chatzir shebadin chalukah lachud, and therefore for such a far off case where there's such a small property, and one guy says, I'll let you split it only if you build it on your side, they're not going to make this takana. that you have to have a chazis, just for that far off case. And now, because by a chazis, the Chacham never implemented the idea of chazis, therefore the mahani chazis, therefore chazis does not help. Even if you put up a wall with a chazis, it will not prove it's yours. So in Rabbi Yosef's opinion, in a case of a chatzir, we have a full wall, and the wall falls over, and I come to Bezin, that kind of belongs to me. V'haraya is a chazis. Rabbi Yosef says, we're sorry you split it in half. Why split it in half? Because a chazis is of no value in the face of a lefichach. It's of no value in the face of a lefichach. The lefichach, which says that because min adin, you're obligated to build it together, therefore you certainly built it together. And the fact that you have a chazis is of no use. Aval, but, continues Bnei Yosef, if one person built like a whole structure building off the wall, he built his house on the wall, but the other guy didn't do that, then have a chazaka lididei. This is taka proof it belongs to him, because now it's become part of my house. Right? So chazis no, building yes. Now over makom shenago she'oisa bala koisel chaloynis b'befnim l're'iyah l'rayish hakoisel shaloi. Now in a location where the custom is that whoever builds the wall builds these kind of windows. I'm not sure exactly what they are. The Pulach Harifta puts this thing in Yiddish, Schweigbeugen. No idea what that is. Shekarim B'lashon asking us Schweigbeugen. Not sure what it is, but it's some kind of cutout that proves that it's you that built it. Then, Im Yesh Edim she'asakein b'shas binyan, if there is proof, there's witnesses that say that I built those windows at the time when the wall was built, Hadei Zeraya, then it's Raya. Vimlav, but if I have no witnesses that say that these windows were here at the time of the building, then Yochal Litin La'acher Habinyan or so, and the other guy can say the presence of these windows does not prove it belongs to you because you built it after the wall was built. And I never noticed it because it was on your side. For example, and it's in such a way where the structure of it does not tell you anything about when it was built. Like the Gemara said about a chazis that's added on, you can't, where you can tell, right? So there are certain times when you can tell that this was in addition to the building, and therefore must have been done later. But then there are times that, for example, this cutout window, it's very possible you look at the window, you have no idea when it was built. And therefore, unless you have eidim that say that you built it at the time of the building, it's not a raya that belongs to you. So this is the end of Rabbi Yosef. So I hope you can see the irony in this din. On the one hand, he says, the Chachamim say, no chazis by a chatzir, because you have a din that's backing you up. And because the din backs you up, no chazis. And if you put a chazis, it doesn't work to prove. But the binyan and these windows, if you had eidim that it was there at the beginning, that is a good raya. This is like the obvious question. And therefore it says the Rosh, I don't know where Rabbi Yosef picks this up. Where does he say this? That the Chachamim don't make a chazis by a chatzir. Even the simun tovu, if it's a good raya, and it's not possible for someone to scheme out of it, right? Because that's the Gemara's whole thing. The Gemara's whole discussion here is about building a chazis to make sure that nobody schemes it, right? Whether or not you can peel off the cement or you can cut it down, the different opinions. But either way, whichever opinion you take, in their view, this chazis is you can't scam it. So why shouldn't it work everywhere, even by a chatzir? Pretty logical. In your opinion, Rabbi Yosef, these windows, which is not mentioned anywhere in the Shas, according to you, it works. If we can prove that it was built at the time of the building, and b'shas binyan simin. So simin she'amru chachamim, the loy shayach b'aramos. If you allow for windows, which isn't mentioned anywhere in Shas, and you allow that to be a raya, if you can prove that it was there at the beginning, then a simin which the chachamim themselves say can't be scammed, like kol shekain should not work. Seems very reasonable. Now, if the question is, and this was the question I asked at the beginning, and this is what I said, that this is what Rabbi Yosef is dealing with, because the Mishnah introduces chazis by bika, but not by chatzah. And according to the Gemara, the reason why the Gemara is mentioning chazis by bika is to avoid someone stealing from you on the other side. So why not the same thing apply to chatzah if I'm not worried about the other person stealing on the other side? So if this is your raya, says the Rosh, that because the Mishnah doesn't mention chazis by chatzah, Seifa, even at the end by bika, the Mishnah wouldn't say it either. Ilav the tana dinna. If not for the fact that the Mishnah said a din, that you have to build it on your side. Ba'agav dinna, and because you have a din, this is our Gemara today, and because there's a din that if you want to build the wall on the bika on your own, you have to build it on your side. Tani takanta. We build it. The Mishnah says takana. So even at the end, when the Mishnah says chazis, it's not a takana. What do we learn from our Gemara today? Our Gemara said that the idea of chazis is not a din when it comes to the wall. When it comes to the Bahutza, Rashi is going to address that in a minute. But when it comes to the wall, the Gemara acknowledged that the fact that the Mishnah says to build a chazis if you build it on your side is not a din. But agav dinner, because the din is you have to build it on your side, eitz toiva, build a chazis. So if it's only a takanta and eitz toiva to avoid ramos, then if you so happen to be building a wall on your side in a chatzah, why shouldn't the same eitz toiva apply? Rabbi Yosef's whole din is built on the fact that the chazis is a takanas chachamim, and because the chachamim weren't misak and chazis by chatzah, therefore it doesn't work. But the Rashi is saying, proving from today's Gemara, chazis is not a takanas chachamim; it's an eitz toiva, to protect yourself against the swindler. Build a chazis. So if it's an eitz toiva, and the chachamim says that a chazis is a foolproof eitz toiva, then why shouldn't it apply to a chatzah? Now, ba'af b'hutza, and even by a hutza, which the Mishnah doesn't explain explicitly. The Mishnah does not state hutza explicitly. Only our Gemara said, Ravina said at the end, that the very last clause is talking about hutza, where you put a chazis on both sides. It's talking about a hutza. But the Mishnah itself does not say explicitly anywhere hutza. And even there, mahanya chazis works, according to Rav Nachman at least. Or maybe even according to Abaye, depending if you're going with Rabbi Yonah or not. Right? Even the loy shayich beramos, because the Chachamim have decided that a proper chazis is foolproof, cannot be swindled. Now, moreover, kivan de bika, when it comes to a bika, where a person can more easily walk into his friend's yard. And make a chazis there too. And still yet we say it works, because we're not so concerned with swindlers. Certainly with a chatzir, where it's much more difficult to go into my neighbor's yard, it should work. Okay, so just that little taich I just said comes from the Pulach HaRifta, which you can look, I sent you the text there. So let's think about this Rosh here and this Rabbi Yosef. How do they stack up, and what would they say about our discussion with Abaye? And where does this leave us with? There's really a Rashi here that we should have a look at. Where does that leave us with Rashi? So let's see. Let's take the Rosh's opinion. No, let's start with Rabbi Yosef's opinion. Rabbi Yosef's opinion is that the idea of a chazis is not a eitz toiva, it's a din. It's a din. And therefore, if the Mishnah the Chachamim weren't misakin chazis doesn't work. Now, if that's the case, if Abaye is of the opinion that a chazis on a hutza can be undone, and therefore ain't a takanta ela b'shtarah, then l'chora we would say that the takana doesn't apply here either. If that's the lush, if that's what we're going. If the idea of a chazis is not an inyan of it's a toiva, it's an inyan in the takana of chachamim that this works or this has to be done. And if the chachamim didn't give it its stamp, then it doesn't work when you put it up there. Then l'chura, when Abaye says ein lo takanta ela b'shtara, l'chura is rejecting Rav Nachman and says like the Ben Yoina here, l'chura. Like the Ben Yoina we saw in the Shtuk of Etzes, the l'chura the same thing, that because the takana of chachamim doesn't apply here, because it can be peeled off, the takana doesn't work here. You can't do it, you have to use a star. But what about the Rosh? The Rosh is saying that the whole idea of chazis is a question of outsmarting a thief, protecting yourself against a thief. And the Chachamim are saying that a chazis is the most foolproof thing. Yeah. Now, so if it's foolproof, that's why you can build it wherever you want, and wherever you have it, it works. Then l'chura, when Abaye comes and says to build a star, if the star is to replace a chazis, and the chazis itself is not takana, the chazis itself is only a question of a proof, then Abaye is not saying it's not a good proof. In other words, how could you reason your way to saying, taking the Rosh's view? It's 20 years later. The hutz of a dafla between the two bikos fell, and you come to Bezdin and you say, "Look, it's mine. I prove it's mine because I have a chazis." In the Rosh's opinion, how could you reject that? If you go with Rabbi Yosef and Rabbi Yoina, which say that the idea of a chazis is not takanas chachamim, and where the chachamim say it applies, and where the chachamim say it doesn't apply, then Abaye says it doesn't apply here, reject you. Sorry, you have to have a star, otherwise it's not yours. But according to Rosh, that the whole thing of a chazis is just to protect you. Then even if it's not the best chazis, but l'payil mamash, the chazis is still here. My neighbor didn't take it down. How could you reject it? So it would seem then, according to the Rosh, again, I could be completely wrong, but it would seem to me that according to the Rosh, Abaye is not arguing with Rav Nachman. He's only adding to Rav Nachman and saying that because Rav Nachman's chazis is not foolproof, if it's still around, good. If not, you have to have a star. Now, the question becomes, where does Rashi stand in this? And I'm of two minds here. I'm not sure. I'm really not sure. On the one hand, Rashi does conclude by saying that Abaye is of the opinion that if you peel cement off hutza, it's not noticeable. It almost seems like it's a tova. That if the guy's going to do it, make sure you have your star there because it could be peeled off. Or is Rashi saying because it can be peeled off, therefore it's no longer a viable chazis, and therefore you can't have it at all. And therefore it's not a raya at all because it's easily peeled off. And what makes me think that the second way is correct is because Rashi adds that line about if the two of them build it, then they have to have a star from both of them. Why? I'm not sure. Because that also could be Eitz Tova. Takantel Ramai. Like the Gemara says at the end, but that's Ravina. In other words, Rashi doesn't say anything about what Ravina says. In other words, does Rashi accept what Tosafos says? Abaye says, Tosafos says that Abaye is saying the Mishnah is okay with giving you Takantel Ramai. Meaning to say that the Mishnah is talking about not a hutzah, but an actual wall. And by an actual wall, the Mishnah says to put up a chazas on either side as a takana for a ramai. What about hutzah? There you have to have a star. Because Abaye rejects Rav Nachman, like Rabbi Yoina says, and like Rabbi Yosef would seem to imply. Does Rashi say the same thing? If the Mishnah is coming to say takanta, and therefore he too is also coming to say takanta. I'm not sure. I'm really still not sure about where do we stand on Rashi. but I hope you can see why I'm struggling with this. Anyway, there's a really nice, I sent a picture of Rashba. If we meet next week, we'll look at that Rashba and the Book of Yosef, and maybe it'll give us some more clarity on this inyan. Okay, so hope we get a shtickle idea of what's going on, different ways of understanding Abaye, and whether we think of Chazis by Bahutza, whether we think of a Chazis as a takana or just Eitz Tova. If it's Eitz Tova, then it can work anywhere. But if it's a takana, we have to think about where takana applies, where it doesn't apply. Does it apply in the case of Hutza? Does it apply in the case of Chatzir? Or is it Eitz Tova? And wherever you have it, it works. This is what we have to think about when we think about what the Chazis is and where it works. Okay, so if we're meeting next week, we'll discuss sometime later if we're going to meet next week. But if we do, we'll look at this Rashba from the Shittik Betzes and the Mukha Yosef there, and it's going to add some more insights into this conversation. I'll go to Nafti.
The Rashi.
Sorry, yeah.
The Rashi on Varesha.
Where? Yeah, this is that ratio, that Rashi is in the middle of a conversation, right? So he's explaining he's explaining the position of Rav Ashi, who says that the Mishnah is okay saying takonas. The first half is also takana, where it says that when you burn a Besach Shaloi, you should build a chazas to prove that it's yours. So that's a raya that the Mishnah is already okay with doing takanta, doing Eitz Ramai. But the Poil, the Gemara rejects that at the end, right? Because the Gemara doesn't. Rav Ashi's answer ends up being l'chora rejected by all the questions, and the conclusion is that the Mishnah is teaching with din, and the din is not that you shouldn't think like Abaye, right? That you should know that chazas does work by Hutza v'Dafna. We still have to address if we go like the Rosh, let's say, and let's say I'm correct in reading in the Rosh. It's another thing we have to address. If I'm right in the Rosh, and the Rosh is saying that a chazas is not a takana, the whole chazas says the Eitz Tova, and therefore if it's around, it works. Because why shouldn't it work? It's a viable proof. Then what does Abaye say about the last statement? Why would you have to have a chazas on both sides? What's the point of the chazas on both sides? Unless hagufa. In other words, when Tosafos says the shaper iste lemisne takanta laramai, is that one way of thinking about it? Is like we're saying it till now. I think Gemara is going back and saying that Abaye is talking about where the Mishnah says Bika is talking about a wall, and by a wall the Mishnah is giving you an Eitz Tova to have a chazas on both sides. But when it comes to a Hutza v'Dafna, no chazas because it doesn't work, or even Hutza v'Dafna. When it comes to a wall, you don't even need a chazas on both sides because it's so difficult to build a chazas that's not noticeable. An add-on. But Hutza v'Dafna, Eitz Tova to have a chazas on both sides. So this Eitz Tova that Tosafos is saying that a buyer is okay with, is that an Eitz Tova by Hutza? And that would be like the Rosh, which says that chazas works everywhere. Or is the Eitz Tova talking about when there's a wall? And when it comes to a Hutza, no chazas whatsoever. You have to have a shtar. So this Tosafos itself is not clear. When Tosafos says that Abaye is okay with the Mishnah being takanta, is that takanta for someone who has a hutza, or a takanta for someone who has a wall? The reason why I said before that Tosafos is saying that Abaye is okay with a takana for a wall, because Abaye is of the if the Mishnah is giving you an Eitz Tova, then give you a foolproof Eitz Tova. And in Abaye's opinion, you can peel off a cement from a hutza. And therefore, a chazas on a hutza is not foolproof. And therefore, what kind of Eitz Tova is that? If the Mishnah is giving you a takant l'ramai, then give you a foolproof takant l'ramai. And if in Abaye's opinion you can peel off the cement, and therefore by a hutza, a chazas is not a foolproof, then don't give me such a Eitz Tova. Which would mean, therefore, that when it comes to hutza, there is no chazas in Abaye's opinion. You have to use a shtar, like Rabbi Rabbi Yosef. And what's the Eitz Tova the Mishnah is giving you? A wall. That when you have a wall between two bikas, put a chazas on both sides as a takant l'ramai. Follow? I'm not so sure if I'm being clear. Yeah, right. The Pashtos, let's go through step by step. The Pashtos, the Mishnah is talking about a wall. The Mishnah never mentioned the word Hutzah. Right? The Hutzah was never mentioned in the Mishnah. Not once. Hutzah v'dafna. And the Mishnah concludes that if you want to build a wall by a bika, build it on your side and build a chazas to prove that it's yours. If two people between a bika want to build together, build a chazas on both sides. Right? So first the Gemara said that the reason why it's telling you to build a chazas on both sides of a wall is takantel ramai. Right? So takantel ramai is that if two people are building a wall between a bika, build a chazas on either side. Fine. Ravina rejected that and said, no, the Mishnah is not busy with takonos, takantel ramai. The Mishnah is teaching you a din. What's the din it's teaching you? He's being mechaber something. That when the Mishnah says that two people want to build a wall together between their bikas, it's not talking about a wall. It's talking about a hutzah. And the din it's teaching you is that a chazas works by a bika, by a hutzah. So there's two chidushim that Ravina is telling us here in the Mishnah. First of all, the chidush is the Mishnah is talking about a hutzah. The last clause. The clause where they're building it between the two of them, but they're splitting the cost. And then in that chidush din, and we're talking about a hutzah, he tells you that a chazas works by both of them, and you don't have to have a star like Abaye said. Right? Following?
The Gemara says it's by hutzah?
Ravina. Omar Ravina at the end. Omar Ravina, hacha b'hutzi gaskinan. 2 lines before the Mishnah. Second to last narrow line. So this Ravina says that what's the chiddush din of the Mishnah? It's talking about a hutzah, not a wall. It's talking about a hutzah. And by a hutzah, the chiddush din is that a chazas works. Unlike Abaye who said you have to have a star. Okay. So comes along and says, no, everybody said, what's Abaye do with the last clause in the Mishnah? The last clause in the Mishnah seems to have no din. It's just telling you that when two guys build a wall, build it in the middle and build a chazas on both sides. Where's the din? So it says Tosafos, the Mishnah is giving you Eitz Tova. Takantel ramai. Takantel ramai where? If in Ravina like a hutzah, or going back to the original way of understanding the Mishnah, that the Mishnah is talking about a wall, and over there's Eitz Tova. Like the Havamina in the Gemara, like Rashi wanted to suggest. The Mishnah is teaching you Eitz Tova, Takantel ramai. Follow? Now l'chura, this Takantel ramai that the Mishnah is giving you, that Tosafos is saying Abaye is taking, l'chura is talking about when you have a wall, not when you have a hutzah. Because according to Abaye, a hutzah is not a foolproof chazis because you can peel off the things. Which is why he said you have to have a star to prove that the hutzah is yours. Or that it belongs to both of you, like Rashi said. But the chazis by a hutzah is not foolproof. So why would the Mishnah give you a takantel ramai for a non-foolproof chazis? Which means, therefore, that Abaye is going back, rejecting Ravina's chiddush that the Mishnah is talking about hutzah. The Mishnah is talking about a wall, and Eitz Tova takanta to put up chazas by the wall. If that's the case, we're still unclear where does Tosafos stand on the question of if L'Poyol I made a chazas by the hutzah. Will that hold up in court? In Abaye's opinion. And I'm still stuck with the machlokes l'chora of the Rabbi Yosef and the Rosh. If the chazas is the takana was not applied to hutzah, reject. If the whole hutzah is just a takanta, then if it's takanah here, okay, what's not here? You should have a star. It's a toiva kamashman to have a star. But the chazas is here, it's mine. Because the it's here. Even if Abaye says in best case scenario you should have a star. Hope that's more clear. A little better?
That's clear. I still don't understand the Rashi. That's clear.
Which one?
On the Reisha, Rashi wants to say that the Reisha is a takana or it's not a takana.
He's saying this is Rav Ashi Rav Ashi is of the opinion that the Mishnah is okay saying takanas. What's his raya? The Mishnah is okay saying takanas because the first clause in Bika, Reisha the Katani v'Oisa Chazis Bachutz, the Reisha, the first clause of Bika, where it said that Koines Satoich Shaloi v'Oisa Chazis Bachutz, those 3 words Oisa Chazis Bachutz is an Eitzah. The din is build it on your side because you can't compel the other guy to do it. But the second half of that first clause, which says v'Oisa Chazis Bachutz, is an Eitzah Tova. It's only takanta. This is Rav Ashi's raya. The Mishnah is okay giving takanta.
So why does Rashi say lav takanta?
It's question mark. It's bitmiyah. Bitmia. Look at the first one. Takanta Rama Bitmia. Vereish the Katani voice chaz b'chutz. Laf takanta mishum ramai hu. It's a question mark. Vereish the Katani voice chaz b'chutz. Laf takanta mishum ramai hu. Is it not that I'm putting the chazas on my side to prove that it's mine and not yours? So you can see clearly the Mishnah is okay giving you takanas. Right? Now, right? Ravina and Rav are saying the Mishnah wouldn't give you a takana. The Mishnah has to give you a din. And Ravashi and Tosafos is saying Abai also is okay with the Mishnah giving you takanas. Takant l'ramai. Yeah, clear?
Yeah.
Okay, so Mr. Shem, we'll discuss again if we're meeting next week. If we do, we're going to look at the Rashban and Shittiv Betzes and the Nemuka Yosef. Sorry, which is going to give us a little more on this question of is the chazas the takana, and therefore only applies when the chacham is specifically said to build the chazas, or is it just an Eitz Tova? And so long as it's there, it proves that it belongs to you, irrespective of what the scenario happens to be. If it's there, it proves that it belongs to you because it's a foolproof raya, a foolproof takana l'ramai, rather than gzeiras chachamim of when you should be building one. Okay, good night.
Good.